Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia Synclavier-V tutorial series. In today's episode, we're going to have a look at the controls in the primary interface, which, as I mentioned in the last episode, are primarily concerned with controls at the timbre level. In other words, they're affecting the entire sound. We're going to need to dip behind the scenes into some of the screen pages to help make some kind of sense of some of these options as we go. We'll deal with that when we get there. Hope you're enjoying the series so far, and if you are, check out the Patreon and channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. Let's start off today by having a look at the chorus options. Now, traditionally, chorus is a modulation effect, particularly beloved by guitarists. It creates a really kind of warm, washy sound. That's not what chorus is in the context of the Synclavier options. What we're doing here is we're duplicating the sound. We're going to offset that duplicated copy by a frequency amount, a multiplied frequency amount, and we're going to play both of those voices back simultaneously. Now, at a voice chorus offset of 1, which is the default, you don't get a doubling of the sound, so you've just got whatever the basic sound is. At the moment, I've dialed up a simple sine wave. Here's the sine wave at 261 Hz, a single fundamental. If I now introduce a voice chorus of 2, I can right click on this control for fine level control. See, I'm going up by 0.1 each time I right click on the mouse and then move the control. Now when I press a note, you're going to get 2 fundamentals. Here's the original tone at 260, and here's the copy at twice the frequency, or 522 if I was accurate enough with my mouse. So this voice chorus, the number that you see in the voice chorus, is the frequency-based multiplier that's applied to the original. And you can get some really interesting effects with this. If we go down to 1.5, again, I'm right-clicking with my mouse. This is going to generate a frequency 1.5 times the original, otherwise known as a perfect fifth. In other words, 7 semitones away from the basic tone. Here's the C at 260, and here's the copy at 260 times 1.5, 390-ish. We also have a fine control, which allows us to go up in 1,000ths of an octave. So I'm going to double click on voice chorus to set it back to 1. I'm going to get my tone going with no offset whatsoever. Simple sine wave. I'm going to right click on chorus fine, and I'm going to set it to the smallest fractional increase I can. And now, really interesting thing happens. Momentarily, the sound completely disappears. We basically have a very slow moving tremolo here, because you've got these 2 sine waves playing against each other with an almost imperceptible tuning difference. So you get constructive and destructive interference as these different tunings play against each other. This is traditionally called unison detune. You've doubled the voices, you've created an extra copy of the voice, and you've very slightly offset the pitch. So you get the ability to generate some really interesting effects with chorus. As we get further and further away, the tuning of these 2 sine waves is getting further and further apart from each other, and that destructive and constructive interference is becoming increasingly complex. Okay, so that's the science of the stuff. Let's have a listen to some interesting sounds. If I dial up a lead preset called modular layered, the preset value for the voice chorus is set to 2, so it's going to make the entire sound, whatever that sound happens to be, duplicate it and offset the entire thing by an octave, and this is the sound we get. If I take away that voice chorus, I'll just double click on the knob. That's the basic sound, and as you can hear, that entire thing's being copied. Let's have another example in the lead folder again. The voice chorus on this sound is set to 1. The reason I've dialed up this sound is to demonstrate an absolutely classic monophonic analog effect. Here's the basic sound. Now I'm going to set voice chorus to 1.5. This is going to introduce a perfect fifth, and as you'll hear, this is a sound that you'll be very familiar with from classic kind of analog based sounds from the 70s. Perfect fifths are awesome. Let's crank this voice chorus up quite high and see some of the effects that we get in the upper values. Let's go up to 6. If we have a look at the instruction manual, we can see what the sixth harmonic represents tonally. So now we've jumped up 2 octaves plus a perfect fifth, so we're still getting that 7 semitone offset effect, but now the new sound has been thrown much higher. Let's go to 7 and introduce a minor seventh. Trying to avoid notes that contain offset to 10 semitones away. If I play a minor third, then that's going to have a note. The C sharp isn't in the scale, but not to worry about that. To demonstrate FM modulation, I've dialed in a new lead sound called Fusion Lead. Let's just have a quick listen to the sound before we go any further or make any changes. So that's the basic sound of the preset. So as I turn the FM modulation knob, you can hear, obviously, something's happening to the sound. It was initially set to 0.4. I'll put it there or thereabout. Oh, I hit it perfectly, excellent. Then I'm going to jump over to the screen section and we'll have a look at each of these sounds to try to figure out what's actually happening. As you can see, this sound uses 5 partials and they have different amounts of frequency modulation being applied. It looks like 3 of the partials are set to 0, but they're actually not. They have tiny amounts set. It doesn't particularly matter. Let's start with partial 1 first so that I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. So we've got 2 different modulation amounts that are being added together here. We have the basic sound from partial 1. Then we have the overall effect from FM modulation. Can you hear? It's the same sound, it's the same effect that's being applied. We're basically just increasing the modulation depth regardless of which of these 2 controls we turn. Now this is a very important point to note, because if we jump over to partial number 5, which currently has its FM mod set to 0, you would expect that from the primary interface, this knob has no effect. The reason you're hearing a change there is because the controls are additive. This FM modulation knob from the primary interface at the timbre level is applying to all of the partials underneath. So if you have a modulator set in your engine, partial 5 does have a modulator defined, then this modulator is going to be asked to do work if the primary interface tells it to. If I turn this modulator down to 0, it doesn't matter what I do from the front end, you're not going to hear any change at all, because there is no frequency modulation. There's no modulator to do any work on the carrier. So if you've got kind of the basic building blocks in place, having a modulator is that essential building block. Then the internal mixer is only a mix amount. These are your starter points, and then you can apply this overlaid mask on top. I'll get us back to the default sound, Fusion Lead. So everything's set back to the way it was originally designed. And then I'll adjust some of the internal frequency modulation values so that you can hear the sound morph. So look at the partial 4, that didn't seem to be doing anything. Let's zoom in a little bit and have a closer look. That's because it's a very short, transient kind of sound. What's partial 5 doing while we're in solo mode? So it's a really rich tonal colour bang to play with the frequency modulation. Once we've got those dialed in, go back over to the master interface and we can adjust the master level for all of those modulation amounts simultaneously. Next over we have bit depth. Now depending on your preset you're going to have different values. This particular preset, for instance, has a bit depth of 24. If I jump back to one of the simple sounds though, the simple sine, its bit depth is set to default. I'll play a note on the keyboard. Have a look at that in the spectrum analyzer. Now, this is supposed to be a sine wave. You're only supposed to be hearing the single fundamental, which is this tone here. So what's all of this stuff going on in the background? Well, it's because we're emulating a piece of equipment 40 years old. It's very difficult to generate a perfect sine wave with a lot of the circuitry that would have been used in the design of this instrument. And by default, the Synclavier was an 8-bit instrument, which means it had quite a high noise floor. What you're seeing here is the noise floor. The bit depth can be set from anywhere between 4 to 24 bits, and you'll see the quality of the noise floor improve or deteriorate. So at 4 bits, we have kind of the worst fidelity, very high noise floor. And as we go up to 24 bits, it gets better and better, so that at 24 bits we've got a really pretty good representation of a sine wave. We've got rid of the vast majority of that noise. Over on the left hand side we have this value called default. Well, what is the default? Well, the default is 8 bits. If I get that going and you have a look at that kind of sonic profile, and then I switch to 8 bits, it's the same profile. That's what we're getting. The reason the default is 8 bits is actually accessed from the screen menu. If you go into FX Master, it's one of the system parameters. Here's our bit depth, and the default bit depth is currently set to 8 bits. So whatever I specify here, that's going to get reflected in the main interface. In the middle of the interface, we've got a couple of master envelope offset values. I'm going to dial back into the Fusion lead sound to demonstrate the envelopes. Now you can see that by default, all of these controls are currently set to 0. So the master interface, the timbre level settings, are having no immediate impact on what's going on under the hood. In other words, the partials are allowed to define their own envelopes. Now what you're going to see in these two envelope windows is all 5 partials playing back simultaneously. Whichever partial I have currently selected when I press a note, you're going to see that particular envelope evolve. I'm going to double click in the time menu to give us full view of the envelope. And there it is. So firstly, the amplitude envelope is our very slow amplitude attack, and our frequency modulation is more or less there instantly. Let's speed up the attack dramatically by pulling the master attack down. So you don't even see the circle move, don't even see the little dot move. It's getting to the sustain point more or less instantly. So we can have a really dramatic effect on these envelopes. Obviously, if I increase the attack, I'm going to make that envelope even longer. And now it's going to travel very slowly indeed. Double click the attack, set it back to default. Now we'll start playing with the harmonic envelope offset. I'm going to make the attack of the harmonic envelope. Let's set it to about 3 o'clock. So even though this sustain level looks like it's basically at 0, it actually isn't. It's really hard when all of the envelopes are superimposed on each other to actually see the one that you're playing with. There we go. We've got a sharp spike up to this attack at the maximum amplitude for the harmonic envelope. This is frequency modulation, and then we're snapping back to sustain. So that's happening almost instantaneously. You're getting this pop, this transient pop, and then drop to a smaller frequency modulation amount. See if we can hear that effect a little bit more clearly. So there's the frequency modulation being increased, and then we snap down to sustain. So why did it take ages to travel up to this first part of the envelope, and the second part, which seems much longer, actually almost be instantaneous? It's because this is the decay. That's a different level. The decay value is set with this harmonic envelope offset. So if we increase some of that as well, we're now applying that overall mask, that template-based mask, to different stages of the envelope. And when I let the key go, we're going to do a similar thing with release. Underneath the envelope offsets, we have the repeat and arpeggio section. This is very basic, I must warn you. It's not a particularly richly featured arpeggio in the Synclavier. Bearing in mind how powerful the instrument is, I'm really surprised at how little you can do here. But let's have a look at it anyway. First thing that I'm going to do is dial up a new sound again. This time I'm going to go into the keys folder, and I'm going to select electric piano number 1. I'll play a C major. Pretty straightforward electric piano sound. Now I'll engage Arpeggio. So we got a C, then a G, then an E. That just so happened to be the order of the notes that I played. I'll try to play them in ascending order this time. So I played an almost instant chord, but as I played the notes, I just basically ensured that I played the C first. The Synclavier broke those notes down into an arpeggio and played them once. And they're being played back in the pattern as actually played. If I go high to low now, then it'll do what I ask it to. That's because the pattern mode is currently set to as played. This kind of seemingly random pattern at the top is actually as played. We have genuinely random down at the bottom, and then some fairly straightforward arpeggio options in the middle. So if I choose up, that's not typically what you expect an arpeggiator to do. You expect it to basically cycle around again and again and again. That's not going to happen until you engage repeat. If I press repeat as well with both of these options on, now we're going to get what you would expect from a classical arpeggiator. So let's play my C major chord. Okay, that's all very well and good, but polyphonic instruments are a little bit clumsy for arpeggiators because those notes are merging into each other. But if we switch to a monophonic sound instead, that's really where arpeggiators shine. So let's go back to our lead sounds and we'll dial in classic oct solo again. Re-engage the arpeggiator and turn the volume down because it's a bit loud, this one. Switch to down. Sync it to the host tempo. All pretty straightforward stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to increase the number of octaves that are played. It's always exactly the notes that are played, which is why I say it's a fairly basic arpeggiator. Now let's have a look at the polyphonic modes, 4 of them to play with. For this demonstration, I'm going to switch back to my electric piano. Now, when you dial in an electric piano, you can see that it's selected poly retrig, and this is the default polyphonic behavior of the synthesizer. In most situations, this is going to be the option that you want. What it effectively means is that if a key is played multiple times, if you've got like the release cycle of a note being played when you hit that key again, whichever internal voice was being used, kind of the generation, the sound generation module behind the scenes, whichever one was being used to generate that sound is going to be reused. So you only ever hear a single instance of any note at the same time. And that allows us to have exactly the effect that we want. You don't want to ever hear multiple Cs stacking on top of each other. I'm going to increase the release to really help me demonstrate this point. We've got quite a long release on the sound there. Now I'm going to start playing a single C. If you watch it in the spectrum analyzer or the oscilloscope, you can see the waveform that's being generated is absolutely consistent. It's whatever waveform that note, what that sound corresponds to. Now I'm going to introduce polynormal instead. Now every time I replay the same note, it's going to get assigned to a new voice, so as many as the plugin can handle at a single time. They're all going to stack on top of each other. This is going to introduce problems with phase cancellation because these notes are now going to start interacting with each other in unexpected and strange ways. Now, sometimes that might be an effect that you want, but in something like an electric piano, it really isn't. So let's start playing this C and we'll see it in the oscilloscope. The wave getting more and more complex. And sometimes, if you look at the spectrum analyzer, the fundamental is being quite heavily cancelled. As different waves at different phase offsets against each other are interacting in this kind of unpleasant way. So be careful with polynormal. It's not normally what you're going to want unless you want that specific kind of phase cancelled sound, usually something to avoid. Finally, a couple of monophonic options to have a look at. This time we'll dial back into the classic oct solo. So we're going to start in mono retrig, which means every time I press a note, the envelope for that sound is also going to re-trigger. So it doesn't matter how many notes I hold down, you're going to hear every single envelope all the time. So I'm going to play a C, then an E flat, and now an F. Got all three notes held down, and as I played each of those notes, they all triggered. If I switch to mono portamento instead, now we only have a single envelope. If I hold multiple notes down, the E flat and the F didn't have envelopes. Now that we've had a look at the two different kinds of envelope management, and we talked about holding multiple notes down simultaneously, let's have a look at what's going on with portamento. So portamento is actually currently engaged for this sound, but it's set very quickly at 34 milliseconds. If I accentuate it, it's going to be really obvious that we have portamento. Now, portamento doesn't care about how many notes are held down simultaneously. In the Synclavier, portamento is either on or off, and that's true regardless of how many notes you hold down. So if I play a G now, I portamentoed into that sound. Now I'll play a G an octave higher. Portamento is always working. The logarithmic or linear control basically specifies how portamento is going to get from one note to the next. Set a rate of 270 milliseconds to demonstrate this effect, and I'll just play a few simple notes. So all of this is linear portamento. So the sound is smoothly scaling from one note to the next. In logarithmic mode, the vast majority of the work is done very quickly, and you have a more kind of accessible, more instantaneous kind of portamento. Personally, I prefer logarithmic. It feels more, I want that punch, that action, rather than the really kind of slow ascent. But obviously, different horses for different courses. And that'll do us for the primary interface. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.